My name is Denise McQueen. I'm the director of Prospect Park Zoo and president of the Heart of Brooklyn board. And for some of the people here are working group members, so they know all about this project, and some others are guests, including our wonderful panel. The Heart of Brooklyn is a cultural consortium of 6 cultural institutions: the Prospect Park Zoo, Brooklyn Botanic Garden, the Brooklyn Museum, the Brooklyn Children's Museum, Prospect Park, and the Brooklyn Public Library. And we have done a number of fabulous projects, everything from commercial revitalization to our award-winning Brooklyn Cultural Adventures program, which is a camp program for children. And we are in the process now of sort of re-envisioning part of Brooklyn, what we do and how we do it. And to that end, we have embarked on a 2-year IMLS-funded grant, Building Strong Community Networks. And this is geared to really diagnose and figure out how we collaborate. We know we do it. It just sort of seems to happen like magic, and now we're trying to really take deep dive into how we do it so that we can reproduce perhaps a replicable process and methodology for other cultural groups and ourselves, so that they blueprint for how we do these things. And along with that, with our fabulous consultant, Alan Brown from Wolf Brown, and some others, we are in our 2nd year where we are looking at our community and certain areas of our community and experts to give us some feedback, some information on how we can better meet the needs of certain targeted community groups that we think we know, and we've done an awful lot, but certainly getting straight from the horse's mouth some real insights into what we can do, especially collaboratively. And so Marcus Daphne from the Brooklyn Children's Museum will be moderating this panel. And without further ado, we'll start.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to give a great overview of actually what's happening and what we're doing today. And so we're going to do a lot of listening. I'm going to do a little bit of cutting off and trying to move through some questions that we'd like to hear. And we're going to do introductions first. But what I'm going to do is actually have everybody on this side of the table introduce each other, just so you all know who's in the room and where we're from. And then if you could give a 2 to 3 minute introduction of who you are and what group that you represent, and also maybe one thing you're hoping to get out of this session today, and then we'll start in with some questions. So I'll start very quickly this way. So if you don't know who I am, I know 3 of you very well. I'm Marcus Daphne, Director of Education for Brooklyn Children's Museum.
Lisa Martin, Senior Manager of Brand Management and Visitor Services at the Brooklyn Museum.
Hi, good morning. Nicole Robinson Etienne, Director of Government and Community Affairs, Wildlife Conservation Society, New York Aquarium.
Good morning, Deborah Alston, Manager of the Operating Budget for the Brooklyn Public Library.
Hi, I'm Allison Day. I'm the Brooklyn Museum's Youth and Family Programs Manager.
Jessica Bicknell, I'm the Manager of Program Development for the Wildlife Conservation Society.
Megan Malaska, Manager of Education at the Prospect Park Zoo.
I'm Meredith Walters. I'm the Director of the Programs and Exhibitions Department at Brooklyn Public Library.
Hi, I'm Wayla Harris, I'm Museum Educator and Access Programs Coordinator.
Good morning, I'm Alan Brown, Wolf Brown.
Good morning, Radia Harper, Vice Director for Education and Program Development at the Brooklyn Museum.
And again, Denise McQueen, Prospect Park Zoo.
Hi, I'm Karen Tingley. I'm the Director of City Zoos Education for the Central Park, Prospect Park, and Queens Zoos, and I'm also the PI for this grant.
I'm Cindy Vandenbosch, and I'm co-chair of the Museum Access Consortium, which is mostly a volunteer-based association that was started by access professionals within museums. And so it started out in the 90s as that, and now it's still mostly volunteer-based, but we lead workshops that are free and open to everyone on various issues related to access, and this is anything from attitudinal access to breaking down barriers to participation within cultural institutions. We bring in speakers. We also try to create a network where museum professionals can connect with one another around certain areas. So for example, we have a grant right now that does focus on autism, and we're in the last year of that grant, and we've been running workshops for the last couple of years. And so we've made some of those resources available online, and I'll certainly follow up and give those materials to all of you afterwards so that you can access them yourselves, because we've recorded most of the workshops when speakers have come in. And then a little bit about my background. Otherwise, I've worked with mostly historic sites throughout the city in the area of access. And so I was at the Tenement Museum and ran access programming there, then gave programs for people with developmental disabilities at the museum at Eldridge Street, and have since worked with City Access New York, which provides opportunities for people with disabilities in the city. So I've also been on the other side where I've brought groups, including people who are on the autism spectrum, to cultural institutions. So I've been on both sides.
My name is Jeff DeBerry. I'm a clinician, a behavioral clinician for EDU programs. EDU programs located in Staten Island. And what we do is we serve the autism community. We have, between our programs in Staten Island and our programs in Long Island, sort of about 600 families, children and families with autism. We do programming, everything from early intervention, preschool programming, school-aged students, adult programming, residential programs, family support programs. And so, what I've been able to do is work, really have some dialogue with some of the families that we serve to understand from their perspective, like what are the experiences that they have when they go to a cultural institution, what are they, looking to get from that visit, and what are some things that, work well, and what are some things that, they think can be improved. Overall, all of our programs have a real clinical and kind of treatment focus. So we see autism as something as just a range of different behaviors that a person either engages in or does not engage in. And we use clinical methodology called applied behavior analysis to try to change individual behaviors within people. We've been very successful and had some really great outcomes applying this methodology over the years that we've been in business.
Hi, I'm Aaron Feinstein. I'm director of the Miracle Project New York and executive director of Action Play. The Miracle Project was a program that we started in Los Angeles. It was the subject of the two-time Emmy Award-winning HBO documentary Autism the Musical. And basically it was a musical theater socialization program for children and teens and their families to come in and create an original piece of musical theater together. And I really learned a lot through that process about taking a very compassionate approach to children, and to really start to understand that children with autism have unbelievable abilities if they're allowed and given the chance to be put into a friendly and accessible environment. And with Action Play, what I've done is I've tried to partner with museums, and we've started to partner with several museums, and we build programs and do staff training for museums and cultural centers to develop accessible and friendly and inviting programs for children with autism and developmental disabilities. We've worked with the Brooklyn Museum and the Brooklyn Children's Museum, which are here,
I'm Alicia Kershaw. I'm with Gallup NYC, and I brought lots of brochures and flyers if anybody wants more information. And I picked out an apple because we work with horses, and we have children and adults with disabilities. We teach them how to ride horses, which in New York I had to learn how to say we teach horseback riding, because if I said riding, people thought I meant handwriting, like creative writing. Why would you have horses in New York City? But therapeutic horseback riding is very proven effective. There's more and more research that it's very effective across a wide range of disabilities. And just to give you a quick kind of heart-grabbing example, we have every session of riders with autism. We have a lot of nonverbal 8 to 11-year-old boys with autism who ride with us. In every session, one of these nonverbal kids talks. Mm-hmm. So it's really something really good is going on. So I actually have spent some time over the last couple of years thinking about inclusion, because when it first started to come up, I'm like, you know, inclusion. We work with people with disabilities. Inclusion is clearly not an issue for us. And yet, of course, it is. So we've had the opportunity to talk to parents and to work with groups promoting inclusion, to think through what inclusion really means. And we also try and work with families. We view our mission as much more than the individual child, but families, and making opportunities that work for families as well as the child that you're focused on is a slightly different kind of approach. I'm very happy to be here.
Good morning. My name is Elaine Stillerman, and am I the only person here with a child with special needs? So I'm representing the parents, I guess. I'm a prenatal massage specialist. I teach all over the country. But I was always the go-to mom. Everybody always came to knocking on my door. Where do I get information about schools? Where do I get information about Medicaid waiver? So I started this website, Big Apple Oranges, which is a resource for New York City families. I'd love everybody to take a card. About 2.5 years ago, I visited the Brooklyn Children's Museum with my son on National Autism Awareness Day. The first day, it was April Fool's also. And I don't know why I opened my mouth. I said, he was 11 at the time. I said, he's 14 now. I said, we're going to the toddler room. And I was told in no uncertain terms, could I bring my 11-year-old to the toddler room, even though developmentally he was 2 to 3. And that day, there was a sea change in my body. I felt on a cellular level, this was not going to stand, not for this mother. And 6 months later, I had a beautiful meeting with Georgina Novosi, who was then the director, president of the museum. And she said, well, you know, what do you want? I said, I want a room. I don't want hours with the toddler room. I want my own room. I want a sensory room. And lo and behold, she heard me, she listened, and her incredible staff got together, and in September we opened the sensory room. So that's why I'm budgeting on all of these meetings now, because our children who don't speak need a voice that can speak for them. So I'm here to represent, I guess, not only my son, but the community at large. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I want to introduce one other person who didn't say.
I think I've met everyone. I'm Hillary. I am previously part of Brooklyn, now WCS, and happy to be here. And thank you all so much for coming.
Great. And I think you started us on a very good note here, which is we're here to listen. So what should we know about your son or your audience or the audiences that you serve?
Every child on the spectrum is a child, first and foremost. They have special ways of experiencing the world and communicating their needs or not. They are learners who, some of them are visual learners, some of them are auditory learners, some of them are kinesthetic learners. They have to touch things. One thing that I found absolutely wonderful, I'm also involved with the Intrepid, the access program at the Intrepid. And one thing that one of the mothers said that resonated with me was that even though her daughter did not respond and did not look at the person who was leading the group, she was still included as part of the group. She was still spoken to and addressed. And the mother said that mattered because that recognized that my daughter existed, you know, that she was valued, that she was part of the group. And without any kind of feedback from the little girl, she followed the rules and she experienced the day just like any other child would. I maintain that we are market hungry to spend our money at your venues, because if you can provide for us what we need, we're there. There's a tremendous need for us to have our children have regular childhood experiences in a safe educational environment. So
maybe we should, and Jeffrey, you could talk about, so we're hearing about the child's perspective, but you work with multiple age audiences as well, so maybe we want to talk about the need that grows over time as well.
Yeah, you know, what we find is all the families that we work with, from one thing that's consistent, from very young ages to very old ages, families want activities to do. They want places to go. The same way that, you know, any family wants to be able to go on outings with their children and have activities to do at home with their children and keep their children busy for their own, you know, convenience as well. Parents of children with autism want that, and they want that greatly. But their options are somewhat limited. The things that typically developing children can do are a lot more things available than for people with autism. So the families of children with autism want things that are specialized for them. They want things that feel, you know, comfortable to them. They want, when they go to a facility, when they go to an organization, they want to feel welcome, and they want to feel comfortable, you know, being there. And there's a lot of things that we can do, or ideas that we have to make these things, like, you know, more, you know, comfortable and more inviting. I can talk specifically about those if maybe this will come up later.
I think you see actually two different threads in families, and they often weave in and out. Some families are very much interested in inclusion, and some families are very much interested in having their own room. And then, as you said, the parent who felt her child was included probably wanted to use the room, but then also wanted to have times when their child was part of a bigger.
If it's possible.
If it's possible. And so it is a challenge to try to figure out which one you're going to do where. What we see is our families are under just incredible stress. They are stressed financially, they are stressed in their daily lives, they are stressed with time. We have parents who call us and say they want to have their child ride, and the child is available at 2:30 on Tuesday afternoon. That's it. Because every other minute of the day, speech therapy, OT, you know, tutoring, whatever it is. So finding ways finding the time that a parent can use is often difficult. And so to me that means scheduling one session on a month or something is really probably not going to work very well, because you have a very small slice of parents who are going to have time in that one session. There's also a lot of hidden issues. I've been in, no one in this room, but I've been to autism-friendly programs where there are flashing lights and loud music and things that kids with autism just really have a very hard time for. And the last thing I'll say just quickly, and we'll probably talk about it more, is I think it would be great to spend a lot of emphasis on helping, sorry, I took this out because I wanted to show you pictures. That's okay. Helping other families that don't have children with a disability understand on a really granular level how to relate to a child and a family with a disability. We work with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. Most of them come to us without a lot of experience with disabilities. And this is the biggest issue for them. How do I approach someone who has a disability? What is it okay to say? What is it not okay to say? And I think, mentioned abilities. Recognizing that our community have abilities and they're developing. They are growing in their abilities. So those, it's enough said, but those are the points I would stress.
I think this is great that you broadened the conversation out to children with special needs or families with special needs. And Cindy, could you sort of generalize for us, because you're seeing different families with completely like the widest spectrum possible.
Right. So, sort of speaking to what Elaine.
Elaine.
She's you're Elaine. Okay. So, it's been very interesting because there's sort of the question when you create programming whether we all want to provide an inclusive environment, but something that we've also encountered with some parents, like you said, is that they want to get their kids or their family members out into an environment and have an experience, and they're not necessarily seeking comfort per se. I've also encountered that with some teachers where they're wanting to introduce their students to a new environment and kind of see how that goes and test the water and have a new social experience that they can take back and learn from. So for example, at the Transit Museum, So they do a program in partnership with the Office of Travel Training, which helps high school students become independent travelers around the city. And so they use the historic subway station to introduce skills, whether it be social skills on the subway or how do you handle different kinds of encounters, to just using your Metro card and making your way on the bus or in other places. But there's such an emphasis on one of the staff members from the Office of Travel Training came to one of the Museum Access Consortium programs, and the focus was so much on providing a welcoming environment. And he said, this is so interesting to me because I'm coming from a perspective where when I take my students out, I want them to be sort of challenged and encounter a totally new environment so that they're able to build and learn from that. But of course, you also need certain supports like a quiet room in case there is some kind of meltdown or there's some, right, you do need the welcoming environment. But he said it was so interesting because his approach is to challenge his students by getting them out into new environments, which can sometimes be very hard, but that means that the institution needs to be on board and there has to be communication and coordination for those types of situations. So I'm just bringing sort of teachers and schools into the conversation as well, because we see in the museum profession many classes of students with special needs coming in that communication with the teachers and with the family members. If you're doing family programs, it's so key to making it a success. And then I would also say for City Access New York, speaking to what you were saying, sometimes it is about respite and it's about recreation when you go out to a site. So sometimes museum educators have an educational objective or goal for a structured program, but it's okay to throw that out the window. I mean, not throw it out the window completely, but it's okay to have the program really be about bonding and connecting and having a multisensory experience versus sticking to your sort of structured plan, because that more than likely may not work. You're going to need to adapt and adjust. And so I just wanted to sort of share a couple of these different perspectives, because we're speaking about, it could be children who have autism or adults on the autism spectrum. We just had a talk back in January, which was very powerful. And if any of you are interested, I'm going to be posting the MP3 on our website in the next couple of weeks. But it was a panel of adults who are all on the autism spectrum, including the moderator, and they shared their experiences of visiting museums. And some of them would rather go to programs that are specific for people who have Asperger's or for people who have autism. They want that scheduled program and a quiet time and a space and a place, in their example, to observe the art and just spend time with the art. Because if they go to a program that's open to the general public, some of what they expressed, and you really should listen to it because they go through specific examples, but some of what they expressed is the anxiety around the social situation and dynamic of being in the gallery and the pressure that they feel from other patrons of the museum. So that was one thing they said, is like, it'd be nice to have both, to have the opportunity to come and just be with other people who are on the autism spectrum.
Well, we went to see The Lion King, the very first Lion King that TDF did. I did not expect Luke to fare well. He didn't. But I felt the experience was phenomenal for those kids who did. I mean, with Luke, it's the first time he went to the Brooklyn Children's Museum. I had taken 3 and 4 and 5, and when you were in, I had to desensitize him to this very loving environment, because anything normal shakes his trees and it really gets him very upset, increases his anxiety level. But what they did have at TDF was an incredibly well thought out program that for those kids who couldn't handle it, and there were a few of us, on the outside there were all these sensory toys. There was a noisy activity center on one side of the theater, there was a quiet center on the other side where I was able to physically roll on top of him, and that just quieted him down. He loves the deep needle compression, he loves the deep compression. So I had this physio ball that I was able to roll on him. And then so for Act 2, he lasted all of 20 minutes which was huge. And they turned the strobes off. They did everything right. And we were in a house filled with other families. So when the kid in front of us got up and started whistling and whooping and rocking and flapping, that's the norm. Nobody had to apologize, I'm so sorry, or prepare the neighbor for what was happening. When you talk about bringing with the siblings and making this a family inclusion, I longingly look at Time Out magazine for children. I scan every single page looking for something that we as a family could do together. And there's very, very few. I think with the typically developed siblings and a special needs child, the typically developed sibling can cope and get familiar very, very quickly. We have to cater to the special needs client and the special needs child who has very few coping skills. A quiet environment, a safe environment, and a friendly environment.
I'm going to bring back, because this is great that you talked about theater and Erin's experience with theater and social experiences. Can you talk a little bit about what you see when you have your group together working over a long period of time? Sure. The types of social experiences, the benefits of social experiences that they're having.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there's this overwhelming myth out there that children with autism are not social and maybe don't have a desire to be social. I think that's the place that a lot of these conversations have to start, which is that children with autism are seeking out social experiences, but a lot of times it's very difficult for them, and they need to be in a place where they are accepted and where they are encouraged. So it's really interesting that we've been talking so much about inclusion-based programs versus things that are more catered to a specific audience. I think what's really fascinating about that is that so many programs that are developed are wonderful, and they are really great in providing experiences for children with autism and their families and welcoming them. And I think that's one part of it. But you also have to pull away for a second and say the idea of, as an institution, is to welcome families and to provide a welcoming environment. That's ultimately, the bigger picture of all of this. And that's something I think that we're all striving to do. So what it makes me think of is how then, I was thinking about this past weekend, I was working with a child with autism, and he always, he'll go into situations that aren't necessarily the greatest place for him, but he'll want to go back, and he'll want to go back to these places because he feels welcomed. He feels like this person that I'm talking to maybe has, he gets me. This place, he loves to go to this eyeglass store, right? Because they have a ceiling fan. He loves the ceiling fan. Okay, right. And and these, kids with autism have lots of different interests, and so many times, to just be acknowledged for your interests, like the guy lets him come in the store, he lets him turn on the fan. It's okay, it's not distracting. And sometimes you have a customer who's just sitting there going like, what is going on with this kid? And you know what? We typically will say, hey, he has autism, and this is something he likes to do. And the guy in the eyeglass store says he's honored because the child loves his fan. He loves his fan. So he's so excited that this child comes in and experiences his fan. So I guess when it comes back to the debate of programs that are inclusive or experiences that programs that are specific and experiences that are inclusive, I think they're both important. I think there needs to be places for families to go and for children to go that are catered specifically for those children. I also think as institutions, we can do a lot to welcome parents and provide these experiences and to provide staff and visitor services and different components that says, and websites and various things that will give people the preparation to be able to come to your institution and say, this is a place that I want to go, where I feel accepted, And I think that's a lot for the parents, but as we all know, kids, when they come, what do they want? Typically, they want to have fun. That's number one. They want to have a good time, So, and they should, right?
Well, this is to another great question. So, Jeff, do you work with Jeffrey? I'm sorry.
Yeah, either way.
All right. Since you work with groups and different age groups going through, I imagine you have to prepare them to go places quite a bit. So what is involved in the preparation of visiting a place is, and we gave a great example of taking someone to see a fan, that is a trip, but there's still probably an awful lot of preparation that is involved in getting them there. So maybe you could talk a little bit about
Yeah,
different
it's
experiences.
one thing about autism, and I think if I really think about what I want people to learn, for me being here, is to understand that autism is a vast range of disability. So autism is a spectrum disorder, and we have this mantra within people work with autism. We always say that if you know one person with autism, then that means that you know one person with autism. and Elaine will talk, sharing her experience with her son and going to the Lion King when it was like an adapted performance, and children were there, they were engaging in a lot of self-stimulatory behaviors and a lot of behaviors that would be disruptive for a normal performance. We had a parent of a child that we spoke with, and she took her daughter to see the Lion King on a regular day. And there was nothing, changed about that environment. And she actually did not have a great experience. And it wasn't because of the lights, it wasn't because of the sounds, it wasn't because of anything that was happening on the stage. She had a bad experience with one of the staff members who was there. And it was a simple thing. But what happened, they were being seated, and her daughter took out her phone because she wanted to maybe take like a picture. And the person said, no, sorry, you can't take pictures. And so the daughter said, well, why not? And the staff person's like very rude and like very curt, like, what do you mean, like, why not? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you asking like these questions? And so in order for that experience to have gone better, the person who was working there, needed to understand that like people might ask these questions and it's more appropriate ways to respond to that. And that's a completely different focus when you're talking about adapting a facility than if you're talking about somebody like Elaine's son who has, self-stimulatory behaviors and needs to be in an environment that's, less stimulating. And that's one thing. Think about autism as being that vast of a range. And so when we're preparing kids to go to a community event or to a cultural, institution, we have to look at their individual needs and what we might need for some of our students who have a lot of self-stimulatory behaviors, who are nonverbal, who aren't able to advocate and communicate for themselves. It's going to be very different than if we have, children who are able to communicate, are able to ask questions, are able to engage in conversations. It's just very different. Some of our children want to know, they want information, they want to pre-educate them, we want to tell them, explain to them what are the types of experiences that they could have there, what are the things that they might see, how is the facility arranged, right? Some of our other students, we may need to just think about, what behaviors are they going to engage in that may be offensive to the community, and how are we going to address those behaviors if they happen? And it's just completely different, and that's what people, I think, first and foremost need to understand. It's the answer, if you ask that question 100 times, it's 100 different answers.
May I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah.
How many, I know that I feel ignorant asking this question, but do kids also feel anxiety that they're gonna react in a way that they know people? I read the articles and it talks a lot about parents having anxiety and being reluctant to take their kids out. Does some of the kids feel that same anxiety? Like, I don't even want to go because I know I'm gonna, be inappropriate.
Yes, and some kids are able to sense that and know that and articulate that and communicate that the way that you and I would. And with those, children, we can work with them. We can talk to them. We can do, kind of like what we would call priming activities, or there's things like social stories that we can do to kind of communicate to them what's going to happen. And there's a whole treatment approach that goes into preparing people for new environments.
Well, I was just going to say, on top of that, I think that they go hand in hand. That if a parent comes into an institution and has a lot of anxiety, a lot of times, as we all know, we're going to set off the children that we're with, our children. And so I think it's creating security. It's both. It's not just creating security for the individual child, but it's also giving that security to the parent. So it's like who came first, or what came first, the chicken or the egg sort of question. The question is how do these experiences provoke anxiety, and how do you kind of quell that anxiety?
What I find is that people with autism, change is difficult. Things that are unexpected are difficult. People with autism do the best with routine and predictability. So going to a cultural institution for the first time is not any different than going to a mall for the first time, right? It's not the institution, just the unknown about going there. And the best what we can do to communicate them and give them information about that in advance, like that's where we can prepare them in the best way.
I'm just thinking, I'm sorry, that, you know, it's hard enough to be a teenager, you
Yeah.
know, you get action, you know,
Yeah.
feel different. I just, my heart,
The other thing you see
So
is that for the child, these experiences can be a lot of no, don't stop, no, don't stop, no, don't stop. And that's where I think the anxiety starts to build. The new situations are clearly difficult, transitions are difficult, but there's a lot of don't stop situations that come up as parents or sometimes teachers try and limit behaviors that they think are embarrassing or disruptive or whatever. So.
And that can manifest itself in adulthood, right? So if you're an adult who has autism, I've heard this said by many people on the spectrum, where they feel like they're an anthropologist sometimes in social situations, trying to read what is appropriate and what's not. And for example, one of the women who spoke on a panel, she grew up in the panel in January. She grew up in Russia and was not diagnosed until actually a few years ago, and she's an adult. And so her whole life she was told no, and got a lot of negative reinforcements for her behavior, and just always felt like somehow she was doing the wrong thing, and that made her close up and not want to go out to cultural institutions, and conditioned her that way. And so now for her, she's getting out into the world because she has a son who's typically developing, and he's getting her out to cultural institutions out of his interest. But for her, it takes a lot of courage to get out there. And one of the examples she provided was going to the Museum of Natural History, and they wanted to see a specific exhibit, but she couldn't find it and became very anxious and was nervous about asking a staff person. And so it took them about an hour before she sort of built up the courage to approach a security guard. And then when she did, because she had so much anxiety about asking him about where to go, she didn't really hear his feedback, and they weren't, she just said it was for her such a hard social situation. So just being sensitive to that, and that goes back to the frontline staff, right? And having frontline staff be aware that if they see certain behaviors, or for example, if they see someone flapping their hands when they're standing in front of a painting, or when they're out in a program, that's not necessarily, there's no reason necessarily to sort of intervene. It could be a comfort to them. It could be a positive sign. So doing sensitivity trainings with frontline staff is so important, and especially security guards, because you think about visually the connection between security guards and police officers, and that there could be anxiety specifically around security guards. So I wanted to share that. And then one other thing that I was thinking of is for working with schools, and if you're going to establish partnerships with schools, you could reach out and speak with the museum at Eldridge Street. They're doing, they have a partnership with P94M, and the teachers there have a special emotional literacy curriculum where they want to encourage, they have emotional vocabulary language that they're learning each month, and the Museum at Eldridge Street is actually integrated in language about how they feel in response to the experience of visiting the Museum at Eldridge Street. And so they've integrated in cooperation with the teachers, they've been able to tailor the program specific to that objective that the teachers have for the students. And in terms of reducing anxiety for the students' participation, they go out and do a classroom visit in advance, bring objects that the students are going to encounter, because there's this sort of challenge of coming into a new environment and generalization that some people on the autism spectrum might struggle with. So bringing in objects, letting them feel them, and then bringing in a visual schedule with showing, I mean, all of us like to know what the plan is, no matter what it is. But to have a visual schedule that they can take home, look at, think about the different rooms they're going to be in, and it really doesn't have to be fancy. This is one of just like, here's what the building looks like, here's what the bottoms, but where we're going to do the introduction, you know, so that they have a sense of where they're going, and then to reintroduce the very same document or images. The repetition is good, you know, and that decreases the anxiety, increases more comfort, and the connection with the staff members. If you can have the same staff member be the person who greets them at the institution, that's very helpful too.
Can I just do two quick things? I have my thing, and I want to make sure these kind of get and make these two quick. So again, back to like how we would prepare somebody in this issue of anxiety. We have students that we would do something like this with, and I have at least 3 students I can think of right off the top of my head where if we were going to go to like a field trip or something to one of these institutions, we wouldn't tell them until we were on the bus. Like letting them know in advance, they would be very stressed, they'd be very worried. We'd have a difficult time even getting them to like leave the building. So we would be very careful with those students. We know that once they got on the bus, once they got there, they would have a great time. But in knowing about it in advance, that would be stressful, and that would cause anxiety. That would make them want to avoid, going in the first place. Again, just the unexpectedness of going. So it's a range, and we would try something like this, and it would go very poor because we've had that experience with these students. So we have to really think individually about things. And then the second thing, which is just because it came up now, is this issue of like security guards. With our students who don't have great communication skills, we teach a lot of like community safety and community advocacy skills. And a lot of what that means is if you're like lost in the community, you find a police officer, or you find somebody to help you. We had a family that took their child to Disneyland or Disney World in Florida. The child got lost and found a security officer, and that was great. But the problem is the security officer wasn't prepared to help them. And he sat there for a very long time, and it was like a big process for the family to get linked back up. So when you're talking about educating your frontline staff, when you're talking about your security officers, we have to hope, what we're going to do with our students is we're going to teach them to go to the security guard if they get lost or if they need help. So we have to make sure that these people are educated to know what to do if and when, God forbid, that happens.
Sure. Let me just talk about, you visited probably one or many of our institutions. You can even use the Children's Museum. What does it take for you to bring Luke to one of our institutions?
I'm so glad you asked. My wish list is that when I buy a ticket wherever I go, there's somebody taking the ticket saying, or I can speak confidently, I have a special situation here. Is there anybody that can work with us? Whenever we go to the train show, the Christmas train show at the Bronx Botanic Garden, I buy a ticket and I go, my child has special needs. Can I speak with the manager? And immediately we are ushered to the front of the line because waiting is so anxiety provoking for him. He definitely got that from me. It's definitely genetic. And then all of a sudden he's watching his beloved trains. And even though he's in a general population, this is not a special needs visit, he's happy, he's flapping away. Because the trains are coming and we get to see the buildings and we get to see the Brooklyn Bridge, and because the staff gets it. So we just want the front line of defense to get it. I would love social stories. Social stories are, one-dimensional, however. They don't really translate into physically being in the facility. I would love a website that has a virtual tour, because these kids are so technologically advanced. This kid can do on my computer what I didn't know my computer was capable of doing. So a virtual tour so we can get a three-dimensional, more realistic view of what's going to come. Picture exchange communication all over the museum. I've been talking about that at the Brooklyn Children's Museum forever. A curriculum, of course, a routine. This is what we're doing today. We're going to go to this room, so the same text that's on the form that we get, he can identify and he can see it. I can bring the social story with me, so when I go to the Brooklyn Children's Museum, I go, look, there's the snake, there's Fantasia. Look, just like we talked about. Inure him, but nothing still, I don't think with these kids, I think you can prepare them as much as possible. The experience is other. When you talk about generalization, it's very, very hard So it's about inuring them, it's about the staff understanding the patients that's involved in working with these kids. It's about not, having people look at your kid with this, as a contagious. But I've walked over to many people, I go, no, it's not contagious. Here, let me touch it, it's not contagious. But preparation and HOV lane, maybe a special membership card or a special button on your card or just a special something recognizing that this kid might have a meltdown, so we want to keep the stress factors as little as possible. No waiting. I mean, let's just get a special HOV lane or an easy pass lane. Really, I mean, you have it for the cars. Why not an easy pass lane for admission? Just, so these kids don't have to wait, so the temptation of the anxiety is minimized.
It sounds like you yourself as a mother, as a parent, have high anxiety about any of these situations where you might have to possibly wait. Like you go to a mall, you're not necessarily waiting to walk in the doors of the mall, but to actually enter one of our institutions, there is this high anxiety factor that affects you personally.
Well, it does, because I know he's getting strong. He's 14 years old. These kids are strong. He pulls at me. We go to the public pools and they open up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we always get there at 10 after 4. Well, they don't open at 4 o'clock. They open when they goddamn well feel like opening up. And so we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And lucky I have Rita, who I've befriended at the Red Hook pool, and she goes, Luke is here. Luke is here. More to the point, his mother's here. But Rita knows us. I mean, I have to make myself very known. I have to make my presence very known. I have to establish a relationship with everybody. You're a security guard at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. He sees, hi, Luke. So yeah, you want to just keep the pressure cooker down. With the lid on, you want to keep the things simmering, not boiling.
This next line of questioning is sort of interesting for us in terms of value. It's a very strong word. What value is there in visiting one of our institutions or programming? Perhaps you could tell us about the value that you're seeing when folks are participating in your program.
Wow. I could go on for days about that. As I mentioned before, and it's one of these kind of dog things, obvious things, but sometimes we don't think about the obvious. Kids with disabilities are growing and learning and developing on their own, plane and their own trajectory, but they are definitely growing and learning and developing. And kids who don't seem to be terribly connected to the world are actually, in fact, many kids with autism are hyper-experiencing the world. So, as I think everybody's alluded to, it's a matter of trying to expose kids to new experiences and learning opportunities in a way that doesn't increase their stress. What we see with kids with autism, more than half of our riders are on the spectrum, is we run in a series of 11 lessons, which is another tip I might add, suggestion I might make, is to think about more expanded programming rather than a one-time visit for all these enduring reasons. But so kids come for 11 weeks, and it takes about 4 or 5 weeks, and then suddenly, and often I'm standing there watching this kid thinking, this isn't going to happen this time, and then they suddenly start to connect. It's not really sudden, but it seems sudden. And before that, you wouldn't think they even necessarily knew they were in the arena. And after that, they know the day that they're going to ride, they know what to do, they know how to get on the horse, and they start to steer. I mean, they really do plug in. And that is what our sweet spot, that's what we aim for, is helping a kid to connect. And then teachers tell us that, and parents, that once the kid starts connecting in the arena at Gallup, it comes back to their school day, their home day. They're calmer, they're more focused, they're more social, they write more, they're just more connected, really, basically connected. So that's, so what we try and do is, and it's so all these themes that people have mentioned are just banging in my brain. Trying to create a safe, comfortable environment for the child and the parent. Trying to create a calm, relaxed opportunity for the child to have a sense of achievement and experience a new activity in a low-stress way. But very important to have success at that. And success to us is not, can be a very small step, but when a child, our kids are the same as every other kid, except that they are on the spectrum, so they want to do well, and they know that they're doing well, and they want to connect, so they totally want to connect and want to be social. So if you can give them an opportunity, which we can, to do well, now you've built in a desire to do more, and then that's when it starts to spread out into the rest of their lives. I've just gone through a very lengthy process of re-examining our outcomes analysis. And our outcome is having our riders connect to the world. It's not learning to ride a horse. It is not learning to ride a horse. It is to connect to the world and lead a more full, independent life. That's a big goal.
So you've given us a good example of one very lengthy 11-week experience, a curriculum that has an outcome. Aaron, Jeffrey, and Steve, maybe you could talk about what types of programs families and students and groups are looking for, and which ones have been successful, in your opinion.
I think, once again, I think it's this really, I keep bringing it back to this conversation of the inclusion-based programs versus the specific programs. I think it is a really interesting topic because, I framed it that I think that we want the institutions to become more inclusive just in general in terms of the visitor staff and how we welcome guests, but also looking at specific programs. And I think that, when you talk about specific programs, I think you have to look at your institution and what its strengths are. I think for this community, when we talk about some of the deficits and things like that, we're talking about a lot of times sensory things, the sensory system. So we're talking about children that can go into environments and become overwhelmed. And as you said very, succinctly, it's such a spectrum. It's so different for every child. There are kids that crave bright experiences, and there are kids that crave no light. They're going to go into so it's that's the difficult part, right? But the part that I think that's important is in some senses creating programs that have an introductory component to them. So, for instance, with the work that we did with the Brooklyn Museum, and Allison Day is here, and we work very closely together. We provided an introduction for the children. Allison visited the school, talked to the kids, gave them a sense of what was going to happen, and then we prepped them again. As you said, we showed them what we were going to do on the days of the museum. And an art museum is not, it can be a very difficult environment. Some of your environments are a lot more, I want to say, easier for this population. A garden is somewhere it's a different sort of thing. A museum where you have paintings that you can't just go up and touch, right? That's a complicated environment. It's a different kind of environment. So I think in creating programs and understanding your institution, you have to know your environment. And one of the things that I was thinking about was, how do you create places? I think sometimes for kids when they come into a museum, and families, specifically when they go on their own, there are places that may not be the best suited for a family or a child with autism. It might be a difficult thing to go into a gallery with just all sorts of open paintings, but there may be sculptures and things that are really friendly for that population. Once again, going back to, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and that's what I think programmatically the Action Play tries to stress, is that all of your institutions are very different. So when we work with people, right, work with institutions, we try to focus on what you have and what you bring to the table. So we're not just saying, this is what works for everyone, because it doesn't. They're very different sorts of models and very different sorts of kids, very different sorts of groups. So you have to understand what you have for this community, and all of you have things that could be very important to this community. So, and then on top of that, I think it's how you define success in that as well, and how you think about success and the outcomes. So what does the success look like? How are these experiences going to translate to your donor base? How are these experiences going to translate to your families? What are you looking to provide for the children too? It's something I think that we all need to think about. To me, a lot of it is, for instance, with the Brooklyn Museum, was enjoyment in the experience, enjoyment in the art creation, enjoyment in getting your fingers dirty and playing with different materials. That to me is exciting. But it's also trying to find out quantitative ways of translating that as well. So
can I just jump in with one thing I've been thinking about as a service provider, so to speak, is, and it's just coming up here constantly, and maybe you guys have all figured it out, but there's a really big difference between an individual parent coming in and a group coming in. And we see that at Gallup. We work with school groups mostly in the mornings, weekday mornings, and then individual riders in the afternoons and weekends. And if we can, and some of the schools just send the kids. And some of the schools send kids with aides and people that are very connected, and some schools have very specific curriculum that they are bringing to us. And to us, the more involved the school is, the better. Because we can, as you were saying, we can match the value that they want to the value we can give. And we, like you guys, I'm not an autism expert. I just spend a lot of time with people with autism. I'm a horse expert to a point. But and you guys similarly, you may have an autism expert on your staff, but by and large, we're amateurs. So we can bring the professionals in to help us say, yeah, this works, and this is what we need, and this is that really just leverages the value way where you want to get.
I can talk specifics.
Yeah, I'd love for us specific. And that was a great bird's eye view.
So, I think the model is to try to replicate when you're organizing and structuring programs. I would look at the way the education system is structured, right? So the education system, we talked about this kind of range of placements, and this kind of exists on a amount of restrictiveness. So the most least restrictive environment should be our goal in kind of educational program. We prepare a child for the least restrictive placement, and that would be just included with typically developing children without any support specifically designed for that person. Just a person with autism in an environment with other people, typically developing children with no support. And the next level from that would be a child with autism in a program, and if the teacher is aware that the person has autism, and they have some things that they're doing to support that child, but it's not overly customized or adapted for that child. And the next thing would then be a child in an inclusion setting with a support person that's there to help them in that environment. Next up from there would be a kind of a blend of multiple children with autism, multiple typically developing children, and in that setting you have one person who's specialized for the people with autism, like one teacher who would be an autism development disabilities teacher, and you have a typically developing teacher for general education students, and they're in the same classroom, and they're kind of mixing students and regrouping students together throughout the program. And then from there you start to get into more self-contained programs where you have children with autism that are more separated from children, typically developing children. And then the next step is for children who are very impaired, and those are children that are in a specialized building or specialized facility. And that's a range of types of educational environments that exist for people with autism. And if I was going to try to structure programs, especially ongoing programs at an institution, I would try to have those different types of categories available. And I'd be thinking about it in that way, that we can place children into a program where there's a child with autism and nobody knows that they have autism, and I would have programs on the opposite end where it's specialized specific for children with autism, and I have specialized staff who have specialized knowledge and training of autism and that are there dedicated to that program, making that a meaningful experience for those for those children in that program, and then everything in between. And there's, and anybody that wants to help and kind of set up and organize programs along those lines, really talk about the specific details that go into structuring kind of what we call placements at those types of programs, but more than happy to talk to people about that.
I also think just in terms of the way the groups typically work and how these programs work, you have elected family programs, families that want to do a weekend, a Saturday afternoon at a particular museum. I think you have school programs in which a child can either do a course, a series of programs, or a one-time visit. I definitely would go with the course. It's way, it works better, and it's much more beneficial for the kids. I also think you have you have your general hours, and how do you also provide times within the general hours to think about programming, so you have times maybe where you don't have as many people in your institutions to think about ways you can invite families in. And I know I'm missing one, but these are the general sorts of programs that are offered. I said schools, families. And then there's also independent programs. I mean, I think that's something we should talk about too. And I think, that there is more of an opportunity for teens. There should be more opportunity. Not that there is. There should be more opportunities for teens to be able to come in and have social experiences because it's so meaningful for kids, specifically kids with higher functioning autism, Asperger's. To be able to come into a social setting where they're accepted and they can do something that maybe is one of their interests. Maybe their interest is being in a zoo. Maybe their interest is an art museum, and this is the perfect place to meet them in some senses and to provide them an experience. So
yeah, I think just one more idea too that, and I've done programming with children, in a lot of different areas, and so just in general, another concept is using your space and sharing your space with people who are doing other types of programs. So don't think that a program at the Brooklyn Children's Museum has to be Brooklyn Children's Museum content. We've had a lot of success with children who have like an after-school program that's like funded through their IEP, and so we do a tutoring program, but we do that tutoring program in a library. So now it's not the libraries that are providing the content, someone else is providing the content, but they're using that facility. And that gets the child exposed to that environment. That puts the child in an inclusion setting. They're around other children. The person who's there implementing that program can facilitate the interaction. They can be responsible for the socialization opportunities. They can be responsible for the content when they're implementing a program in your space. And that's, I think, is a great way, without having to develop a lot of specialized knowledge and skills within your staff, to say, listen, we're available, we're the Brooklyn Children's Museum. If you have children who have programs that have funding for programs, bring them to us. We'll give you space, we'll give you our facilities, let's use our facilities, and you educate and do your programming with your child in our space, right? And then let the relationships grow from that initial offer.
I think one of the biggest steps you can take is to form partnerships with service providers and with organizations like, for example, if you're targeting families and you want families to feel welcome, the National Autism Association New York Metro chapter is composed of hundreds of families that have, whether they're children or spouses who are on the autism spectrum. That's a great place to reach out to. They're looking for opportunities and they want to work with you to help you develop your programming, whether it's a structured program or just giving you feedback on your environment. And so that's a good place. Hearts and Minds is another service provider. City Access New York, which is the organization that I worked for. I both taught kids K to 8th grade who were blind, but some of my kids also were on the autism spectrum. And then I also was a coordinator of a respite program for high school students on the autism spectrum for school breaks. So this is another thing when you're looking at the schedule. A lot of these organizations receive funds to go to structure programs so that families during school breaks, a lot of these families might be lower income, they can't necessarily afford to take their kids out to different places, or maybe they work multiple jobs. And so the idea of these respite programs is to pick up the young people and take them out for recreational opportunities. I'll say that one of the best places that we went was Aviator Sports Club down at Floyd Bennett Field, because of the opportunity to move around and the sort of kinetic experience, so if you're thinking about your space, I know that might not work as well in some of your institutions versus others, but considering just like a multi-sensory approach and not forgetting movement and exercise as part of that. And that sort of speaks to the work that you're doing too with the horses. There's another, if you're interested in working with adults who are on the autism spectrum, there's an organization called GRASP, and we partnered up with them for one of our sessions, and they expressed that they'd love to have places to go, like what Aaron was saying, places to go where they can gather together around topics that are interesting to them, where they can go. I mean, exhibits are perfect, right? Because you can go deep into a topic, and this is something that a lot of People on the spectrum do like to focus on specific topics or issues, and that can be very enjoyable. So to provide that point of connection, and you were asking, well, what do they get out of it? A lot of times the entry point is like the topic or the exhibit, but it's actually what you get out of it oftentimes is the social engagement, and so it's different for every person though. Again, it's really hard to talk about what does this audience get out of the experience of going to a cultural institution, because it's such a broad spectrum. But in terms of thinking about how to start, one of these community partners, I think, or a service provider makes a whole lot of sense, because then their staff is committed, they give you feedback, they're with you the entire way. And so it can be a longer program, or maybe they just bring on the school breaks, like City Access. Maybe they just come a couple times a year. But you'd see the same staff people over and over, and they know better and better how to prepare their young people that will be coming. So that's sort of one of my pieces of advice, is you can create a program, and we've seen this happen in all of our institutions, but you create an accessible program, and you put it out in the world, and no one shows up. And so how do you sort of avoid that from happening? That you bring on community partners and get them engaged and involved, and they're going to show up, and they're going to care.
It takes years to really educate yourself and get yourself experience that you feel comfortable working with people with autism. And so part of the professionals, we're communities full of people that have this expertise and have these experiences and have the connections with families. Partner with these people to get these professionals to bring children into your facilities, and then develop and foster and grow those relationships. And that's where you're going to get your connections with families, and that's where you're going to get the expertise that you're looking for your programs. And that's where you're going to get great ideas from, like how to specialize and adapt programs for the development of the disability autism community.
And a lot of the specialization that you end up doing for visitors who are on the autism spectrum is actually just great programming anyway. So I bet all of us can attest to the fact that we've witnessed museums incorporate a lot of these techniques, like this visual schedule, into all programs, because doesn't everybody want to know where they're going?
It goes both ways. When I went to the museum, when we started the center, we met people that are working in the totally taught center, and said, I'd love to bring this person to my program and let her come in and work with my staff in my program to share some of her ideas and her approaches with what she does with her, in her totally taught program, and work with our preschool students in our facility, because it's, people, are working in their own worlds, but information shares great across different programs.
Before we open it, a little bit, before we open it up to the whole group, we are going to do that in just a few minutes. So this whole partnership, and the reason why we're all here, is to really think about working across institutions, and to think about, we're a zoo, a library, a children's museum, a garden, an art museum, and a giant park. That's what unifies us, except for, unfortunately, the children's museum, which is a Boston. I'll train to get to. How could you perceive us working together based on your audiences or what you've seen in excellent programs? And after your perception, and I think we'll ask more clarifying questions from the group.
I just love the idea about sharing resources. I mean, when I bring Luke to the zoo, all he wants to do is watch the seals being fed. And he's really rapt about that. He's really engaged. He's flapping and they're flapping. They communicate with each other. And with that calmness that he gets from watching this, I think we could then move into a smaller room and have a program set up for him. So there's a definite, one hand wash, one hand scratching each other's back. I love the idea that we have a sensory room now at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, and turn that into a lecture hall for autistic kids, or not quite a lecture, but a learning experience for autistic kids. So you have rooms, you have situations in each of these institutions, these marvelous institutions, that really can translate on so many levels. And I love the idea about making a tier education process. That the highest functioning versus the lowest functioning. Luke is on the lowest functioning part of the spectrum. So I really do need the special one-on-one guidance. And I'm low functioning too, so I need it as well. But then you've got kids who are very verbal, who know better than you do, and just have these quirks. So, you know, I love the idea about educating on different levels. That means, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of programs, but all with the same goal in mind, to engage a child, to speak to him and her in a language in a way that they can ascertain what's going on. And trust me, these kids get it. They just might not have the affect of, oh wow, teacher, or facial expressions, but they hear, they see, they feel, they touch. I am blown away by what he comes back with from time to time. It's like, where did you learn that? I'll be driving in the car with him, I'll just throw out, 4 and 2, he goes, 6. My kid does math. Well, let's go to the zoo and let's put 4 seals and then 2 seals and how many of that all together and just turn it into an educational experience. These kids learn, and the more you can ease them into it without the trauma of the anxiety, keeping the levels low, the better off everybody's going to be. But you've got to educate everybody in the staff, and the preparation is so key for the family, for the school group, for the educators. I mean, at TDA, what they did with the actors, they even trained the actors to work with these kids. And there was one kid in the front row kept shouting out to the actor, "You're doing such a great job. You're doing such a great job. You're doing such a great job." And the lion or the rhinoceros or the giraffe came over and said, "Give me a high five." High five, and he sat down. He just wanted recognition. Did it work in the was it written in the script? No. But did it work for us? Absolutely. Shut that kid up. Acknowledge it. I want to see the show. So you have to be fluid. You've got to be creative, but you have to be trained. Everyone has to be trained.
I think about it thematically. Of course, I think about it from Gallups' point of view predominantly, but I have an image of, there's actually an exhibit at the City Children's Museum in Manhattan about the NYPD Mounted that's, I think, closing that I didn't even know about. But something like that, supplemented with a reading program of books about horses, of which there are an incredible number of really great ones, including those stupid ones. Look, I used to read cereal boxes when I was a kid, anything a kid reads is fine, but there's some very high quality horse books, coupled with an open house at Gallup, go see the exhibit, get some books, meet a real horse, what a great way to put it all together. And you could, like a open house New York type weekend or an ongoing thing. We have free public education every fall and spring nice weekends. So I think science, what the horses eat, history. New York City had so many horses 150 years ago, you couldn't even walk on the streets. So there's science, there's history, there's literature, there's hands-on, and you can pull all these pieces together. I would like to say, I'm sitting here thinking, boy, this is a lot of work. And I just want to say that I put out that idea knowing it's a lot of work. Staff training is a lot of work. Putting these curricula together is a lot of work. But I think you will find that there are a lot of people like me, for whatever I could bring to it, who would be really happy to put in time and help you with that work. And I think there are funders who would be really interested in putting together a kind of a flexible, lasting curriculum or approach.
I really, I love Brooklyn. Okay, I'm going to start there. I moved to Brooklyn about 6 years ago, and I've really fallen in love with Brooklyn. And I think Brooklyn is what unifies your groups together. I think Brooklyn is an incredible place that has shown this amazing ability to develop and to become something that a lot of the world, I think, is interested in and thinking about. And, I think my own dream is to see Brooklyn also become the most accessible place too. And I think that what unifies these institutions together potentially is a commitment to accessibility and to thinking about accessibility in different ways. We're talking about a population that has, in some senses, floated on the fringes of the accessibility movement, a lot of times because of the difficulties that we're talking about, what seems to be confusing and difficult. But I also think it's a lot of it's that you guys can do it. These are kids, these are families, these are adults that in some senses want to get out there in the community. They want to be invited. So what I encourage you to do is find maybe a day or some way to let these families come together and explore your institutions. And I do think training is a component of that. I think there needs to be training. But the training, the goal is to prevent stress. And it's so funny that anxiety and stress have popped up a lot. And it's so funny how many sides the anxiety and the stress. It's like on the staff side, it's like, what do we do? It's on the parent side, oh my God, my kid's gonna have a meltdown. It's on the kid's side, whoa, it's like all of these different elements, but I do think there are ways to prepare that are not that complicated, that will make your institutions have a wonderful experience. And I think, to me, as somebody who's not from Brooklyn but has grown to really love it, I think Brooklyn can do it. I think we absolutely have Brooklyn is this incredible place, and I think we, accessibility is in some senses, and why these programs are interesting to other families that don't have kids with disabilities is because it teaches us how to be more accepting. And as my good friend Stephen Shore, who's a guy with Asperger's, but he's a professor at Delphi, always says, yeah, acceptance is great. We want to encourage acceptance, but we also want to encourage advocacy. He always sees advocacy as the last step. And if we can all advocate for this community, I think that has a lot of meaning in changing the impressions of what this community can offer. So I think that's a really important piece as well.
Okay, specifics again, people. So if I was to do something specific, it's going to unify the 6 institutions that are presented here today, and then it's going to maybe have an impact where you get people overall more involved with the program. I would do something like a 6-week or 12-week program and call it orientation program, something, a hard Brooklyn orientation program, and have children, families would sign their children up, and they would do two sessions at Brooklyn Children's Museum, 2 sessions at Brooklyn Museum, 2 sessions at Prospect Park Zoo. So they would rotate and alternate between each of these institutions on Thursday afternoons from 4 to 6. You would have an intake process, so you would have to have some intake coordinator and an intake process where people would fill out, give you some basic information about their children so that you would know which group. Maybe you'd have 2 or 3 different groups, and you kind of review the intake information, and you would assign kids to whatever group is more appropriate.
Can I just throw in the meantime?
Yeah.
You don't set this up in January expecting people to come.
No. It takes time. It takes time to push this out. It takes time to process the information. It takes time to make decisions. I would, encourage some of the groups to be groups where children are supervised or chaperoned by staff who are familiar with them, and we would have some groups where the people that are involved in the program don't have anybody, and it's just developed and implemented by your own staff. And I would have a careful intake process so that you appropriately assign kids to each group. And I would say that if something like that happens and something like that was successful, I think you get one impact would be that families would develop long-term relationships. So children they would go through those orientation processes. The children in the higher functioning groups would want to come back and they want to volunteer and they'd want to be involved in that level. And the students in the lower functioning groups, because they're more comfortable and they've had this supervised chaperone orientation process, the families would feel more comfortable bringing their children on an ongoing basis, right? I also think that one thing that I think really is pervasive in the autism community is that good programs, people communicate that. People find out about good stuff. When I was in graduate school in Michigan, the location where I was, the population of autism increased 300% in 5 years. And that's from a public health perspective, that's a crisis. And people started researching, trying to figure out why. The reason for that was because our graduate program had a public intervention program. for people with autism. So what was happening is people were relocated from all over the state to come here to take advantage of this program. It wasn't that autism was growing, it was that people moved here to do the program. People always talk about like Egg Harbor Township, New Jersey, and Brick Township, New Jersey as being like real centers of autism. The reason is because there's great autism service.
Yeah, well, the school system is
people will move, and now it's got like, and now school districts are aware of this, and now it's like the reverse, and now school districts don't want to like communicate so much about their program, because if people are aware of this, people are going to move there. Now, how are we going to serve everybody? So that's a reality, and just know that if this is done right, you're going to have more demand and more people that you're ever going to be able, to serve.
That's
and that's a good thing. And that's a good thing.
We don't do any advertising. We have
Yeah.
over 250 kids on our waiting list.
Yeah.
It's all parent word of
Yeah,
mouth.
it translates.
It's terrible. I want to get that waiting list down.
Yeah,
It's all parent word of mouth.
You'll be
But it
blown
took 2
away.
years to get it started.
If you do a 1 12-week program, you serve 30 children in 1 12-week program, and it's done well, it's prepared, and it's successful. You'll have a waiting list to get you till for the next 30 years. I mean, and there's some sadness. There's some sadness there too.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is that are there access coordinators or people who are responsible for accessibility at each of the sites? Because I think by having that, right, having point people who are responsible to develop their own knowledge base, even if they're not already experts in this area, they can grow into this role, or So that's like one point of, if you're going to work together, having access coordinators at each site that regularly sort of get together and form this programming and make sure that then there's sort of a train the trainers situation where then they're going out to their staffs and implementing training programs, but you could put together one like frontline staff training program and bring together all your security guards and all, so it's just utilizing each other's resources, which I'm sure is part of the goal anyway of Heart of Brooklyn. The other thing is using professional networks outside of Heart of Brooklyn. So the Museum Access Consortium, it's free. We have workshops that are about once a month, and we bring in experts who speak, and it's all volunteer based, but we've had really amazing partners come in to lead comprehensive in-depth trainings, and a lot of them have breakout sessions where you brainstorm ideas with other professionals from a broad range. We have people from libraries there. Well, I've seen most of your institutions, by the way, at the MAC workshops, but just to realize that that is a resource and an entry point. And then in addition to that, I've seen more and more of this, and I think it's great. Go out to other institutions and observe their programs. So for example, the Queens Museum of Art has 2 staff members who are therapists, and they've been running program, not those particular women, but the Queens Museum in general has had programming for people on the autism spectrum since the late 80s or early 90s. They have a brilliant track record and really know what they're doing. And so I would encourage you to go see a program at the Queens Museum of Art. Go, if you're thinking that you want to look at drop-in programs, check out the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They do a drop-in program, so does the MoMA. Then those happen, you can look at the schedule, but they do them regularly on Saturdays. Pardon?
Lincoln Center also.
Lincoln Center is great, yeah. And
I want my kids to sing at the Opera House.
Yeah. There's so many wonderful programs out there. Same with the Intrepid Museum has a comprehensive programming, and they're actually now employing a special needs educator who's going to be full-time on staff.
Miranda Applebaum, we're going tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. They're exceptional. If you're thinking about maybe, I was also thinking for visitors who are coming or caregivers who are coming with people on the autism spectrum, that it might be helpful to have one place where they can go and find resources about accessible programming at all of their institutions.
It's called
So
the
there-
Yellow Oranges.
Yeah. So like the virtual tours, if you're gonna have virtual tours of your institutions, the Lower East Side Tenement Museum has an excellent virtual tour on its website where you can step into each apartment and look around and
Well,
get
you
a
have,
sense of
you
things.
have a link to, a link, I don't do any of that high technical stuff.
Uh-huh.
You would link to your institutions, and then your virtual tour will be there.
Perfect. And even centralizing all of this in one place so that they don't have to visit all of your respective
So it's part
websites.
of, be a Heart of Brooklyn, that would be
Yeah,
the Heart of Brooklyn
right.
function, is like, let's have a Heart of Brooklyn website that kind of pools all of this access information across all the member.
Right.
organizations.
There's a Brooklyn channel, there's a Brooklyn television channel that we should contact. New York one we should contact, get out to the mass media.
I think it's so interesting because there are as many wonderful things that are happening throughout the community that we're, all of us are very aware of a majority of these things. I think it's so fascinating that there's so little inner dialogue between a lot of these things. And so that's why, for me, a real big goal is connection. It's really bringing people together as much as they can, throwing off as much pretense as you can, and saying, let's invite, let's do this. I think that's so important because there are just so many little, factions of all, and everyone's got, and it's a very interesting community in some senses because there are a lot of little divisions and things like this. I think there are, but ultimately what it comes down to is parents and families and children want to be respected. They want to know that they're respected, and they want to know that they're safe and that they have a safe place to be. I think that's so much of it. So.
I was also going to mention NCMER, the New York City Museum Educators Roundtable, has a peer access group, and the way that functions is it's a pretty informal group, and everybody just emails each other for advice and ideas. And so that's another they get together for happy hour drinks periodically to share what they're experiencing and give updates. So the other thing I wanted to touch upon was that beyond thinking about whether it's a lengthier program where you're going to partner with an institution and then partner with a service provider and do a long-term collaborative partnership, or you're going to develop drop-in programs, or maybe there's a mixture of all of these. There's also the opportunity, I think, with Heart of Brooklyn to potentially explore opening up volunteer opportunities or even employment opportunities to adults on the spectrum. So that's the other thing it came up briefly, but opportunities to engage and contribute with your sites. But again, I'm not sure about the sort of implementation side of things, but that's where you would work with a service provider that is seeking these types of opportunities and this type of exposure.
There's no shortage of service providers that are seeking those types of opportunities.
Well, and it's just a huge undermet population is the young adult population that are looking for internships, looking for volunteer opportunities. It would mean the world to this community to
Yes,
open up something like that.
after age 21 and when school ends, where do these people go? They go back home to their aging parents. It'd be really wonderful to do that, and that's reality. It'd be really wonderful if some of them could be self-sufficient, or learn skills, or at least have a job, have a few dollars in their pocket.
And since I'm Madam Money this morning, for the last 10 minutes, there is funding for that, for training and hiring people with disabilities, state funding.
Thank you. I think that the lesson here is that advocacy goes both ways, right? So if we can advocate for your community will immediately advocate and visit our community, and we're always thinking about that. So I'm going to open it up to the whole group now for questions. I'm going to start with your question.
It's sort of a deconstruction question, which was like, what could we have done differently? There was the first Saturday a few years ago, and there was a young man, so they're, escorting him out of the auditorium. So I'm saying, well, wait, can we just try to talk to him first? So, because at this point, we don't know yet that he's nonverbal. So I'm saying, well, you know, are you able to be more quiet? And he sort of, you know, smiles. And, you know, so he pulls out his ID, you see that, you know, you see his ID that he's able to travel with. It says, but he was writing on one of the police women's head. But I guess he says that he can't talk. When we said, well, are you able to control the noise? He said, no, I can't. And so I'm responsible for visitor services. I have police here, I've got guards, I have an auditorium full of people, many of whom are afraid. So I really didn't know what to do. So I was saying to him, well, there are other things that you can do here today where if you continue to make the noise, it's okay, because it's the noisier day. But he writes in the pad, I want to finish seeing the movie. You know, and I know he wanted to finish seeing the movie. But at this point, the police are feeling that, well, he can't go back in there because the majority of the people in the room don't want him to be there. So the end of this sad story is that since the movie was the only thing he wanted to do, he left and went home and this
never came back.
still. Probably not. I mean, there's a lot of people on First Saturday. I don't know. Maybe he has been there, but you know. But then then other guards were saying, and people were like, "Oh, that's sad. I hear you kicked out this guy today." No. Like, oh, that's not what totally happened. But so, in looking at that, I don't know what we should have done or could have done differently. I mean, I know that I'm glad at least that I physically blocked him with my body and didn't let police rough him up, because it didn't help also that he was kind of a big young black guy. So there was already kind of a dynamic that I wasn't liking, so that part didn't happen. But he didn't have the visit he came for, and you know, the independence that he was going for didn't happen correctly.
So you are allowed to rough people up in a museum?
No running.
No running.
Well, to me, just the very fact that if you're saying like, okay, you see this, or you have to. I mean, you know, he was touched in encouraging to do. So, you know, so that much it was like, well, let's not touch him. Let's just talk to him. You know, so that I stopped.
So there's a great question in there, right?
Yes.
Which can help us, which is how, so we have this, the children's, all of our institutions have this, and many institutions have had to remove people because the majority will be very overwhelming on the visitor services side and the security guard side and say, you need to address this, I am uncomfortable in this situation. What can we do better?
Well, the AMC movie theater chain around the country has Saturday morning shows at 10 o'clock in the morning, a couple of times throughout the year, where autistic kids and their families come to watch the first-run movies. Spider-Man, I mean, whatever. The lights are left a little bit on, they're dim, but they're still slightly on. The noise, there's no coming attractions, there's no advertisements. The sound of the movies is a little bit lower, and if kids need to flap and talk and dance and carry on. So, but is a form of segregation. However, it does allow the family to have a movie experience. If the young man wanted to see the movie, maybe it wouldn't matter what time of day he saw it. But, you know, as a parent, I would have stood up and said, you know, he paid his admission or it's free Saturdays. This is a public institution and everybody here is welcome, people of all abilities and disabilities, and deal with it. This is life. I mean, what are they going to do on an airplane with Luke? What I do as a parent is I tell everybody around me, and I tell the flight attendants, this is a special needs child. There might be kicking in the seat in front, there might be all sorts of sounds coming out of this child. That's how he communicates. That's my son. Deal with it.
Well, you know, what's fascinating is this even happens in communities of just people with special needs. So let's say that this situation and how you handled it by saying, I'm in a public setting, the majority, or what you felt was the majority, is reacting to this situation. I don't think, in some senses, by offering what you did anything wrong. I think that was actually that was a right thing to do, saying, hey, this is what's happening, I'm trying to communicate with you. Now, the security and all of that, that's a tough call, because that happens, and if you are unaware, or if the staff is unaware, that seems to be a lot of times the go-to procedure. But I think, let me take it back to the other example, though. I've been in rooms with just special needs kids, where there is a kid that is the overwhelming child in the room. And so it's a very complicated situation, and a lot of times, you have to troubleshoot through the situation on your feet. For instance, I lead a class where there's a kid, and he makes a lot of sound. And we have kids that are sensitive to sound, really sensitive to sound, right? He makes a lot of noise, okay? So we do our best. We've done things where where he's gotten really riled up, and we've taken the entire class. We've let him stay in the room, and we've kind of moved the class where we got uncomfortable. But ultimately, at this point, we've included him in the group, and we've created this culture where this child is accepted and things like that. But that's taken a long time. But you still see it over and over again where this kid a lot of times will set somebody off. And I think the reality is a lot of it is once again, it goes back to the debate of versus inclusion-based programs or specific programs. I think they have to happen, they're both parts have to be there. I think they're both essential. And I also think it goes back to how do you create a culture of respect within the museum? So in some senses, this can happen, but you also know that the people around you are trained and able and feel capable to handle the situation the best possible, and can maybe observe some of the signs. Maybe, he's flapping, or he's doing something that's a dead giveaway, that this person has special needs in some senses. And therefore they can proceed a little bit differently.
To me, there's so many levels here. You had a man who was interfering with other people's enjoyment of a movie through no fault. It's not what he was. People couldn't hear the movie. You had people who were frightened of the man, which was not an educated response, not an informed response, but it was certainly a real one. You had staff that were reacting appropriately, but because of all of this was an overreaction. But I think at the end of the day, the big problem is you didn't have anything else to offer this man. And so whether it's a special screening or, maybe you could have put him in the control room, I don't know.
But she didn't, she said that she didn't. She actually tried. That's what I thought was interesting. She said, you said to him, I have some other options. And he said, I want to finish the movie.
But those options weren't watching the movie. That's what
right.
So, and I'm not saying in every situation you're going to have another option, but at the end of the day, the reason he left is because he couldn't see the movie. And if you'd been able to say, you can see the movie tomorrow, or I'll put it on after it's done for you, then that would have changed the whole thing. As some people, like this man, even if you say, I have a special screening and this is not for the people who make noise or whatever, they're not going to honor that. And so you have to there are just going to be times when you can't meet everybody's needs, but if you at least have something you could offer them.
Yeah, I also agree. I think that the way they handle the situation is perfectly appropriate. We have one of the kind of rules that we try to live by, the ideas that we have when we're talking about the work that we do, clinically in the educational setting, is we talk about inclusion. We try to think that it's 80% of community inclusion is on the person with disabilities, and 20% is on the community. Right. So any child that I work with, I would expect that child to be able to go and sit through a movie without engaging in any kind of disruptive behavior. And I wouldn't see a problem with that institution saying that if you are engaging in this disruptive behavior, then this isn't appropriate, for you to be there. And I don't, so that's why I don't see a problem or don't have any concerns about what you did. I think that, people with autism should be held to the same, standards as the rest of, the community. The community needs to understand a little bit and be sensitive the way that you work, because you didn't allow it to escalate into a major, police event. And I think that was what you did. That was you doing your part, was preventing this from turning into some kind of, criminal, incident. And I think that's perfect. I think that a good way to handle that is to just have clear rules for your staff that everybody is aware of, everybody knows that this is what is acceptable, this is what's not acceptable. If you're, creating noise, if you're engaging in behaviors that are disruptive, we're going to tell you what to stop. And if you don't stop, then you're going to have to leave. And that's...
Jeffrey, you're talking about people who can't control how they react. I mean, Luke makes very strange noises when he's enjoying something. Those are his happy sounds. In the park, so many times I had kids coming over to me, why is he making that noise? Why is he doing that? And I go, that's his happy sound. You laugh, you go yippee, ta-da. He goes, ooh, that's his happy noise. I wouldn't tell him in a movie theater not to make his noise.
Well, and it's interesting, one of the reasons I got into the museum thing was because of an experience that was difficult in a museum. I went with a child back in the day in Los Angeles. I'm not going to say the museum. I went into the museum, and the child literally walked into the door. There is an enormous Buddha that greets you as you walk in. I'm not giving it away, I hope. Okay, and the child, because it's no fault of theirs, really. He was stimming out on the Buddha, and he was really, and literally the security guard came right over to us, and the exchange was not good. And what ended up happening, and the problem was, what I see it, and why I think it's great that you stepped in. I'm looking at this as you were the advocate, and I go, yes. I mean, that's the important part is that was missing, right? Was that what happened was he escalated the kid, through his interaction. Now, granted, awkward, weird situation, not knowing what this might look like, maybe not ever acknowledging this could be an experience that could be had in your museum. But it happened, right? And the guy just didn't have knowledge. I didn't, at the end of the day, I don't fault the security guard. He didn't know. I mean, he did what he was thinking. He was uncomfortable. He came in and offered a reaction that was uncomfortable. Unfortunately, it escalated the situation, and that was the problem to me, is that the security guard, rather than being the antecedent that kind of prevented the situation and securing and making things better, what he did was he came up and he revved the child up more, and then it became a situation where I had to step in and literally drag the child out of the museum because it went through the roof, and that was the problem.
And just to sort of cap this question, so if you have 5 minutes to go through some other questions, I think it really does go back to the institution's and core values, which is, do we really welcome all people to all programs? And that's a very difficult question for us to ask ourselves. And if we have specific programs that have to be in absolute silence, there are many people who can't do that. The same thing with captioning on a video, I would say that, there's such feelings about putting captions on a video in an art museum, but for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or they want those captions. So it's a museum-wide international conversation. It's not just what us six are doing. A question.
I just have a quick question.
Everyone answer. Yes, go.
Is there a perceived barrier or a unique attraction that's specific to living institutions like zoos and aquariums and botanic gardens that that's for this community that we should be aware of?
Say that again?
I'm thinking, is there a perceived barrier to a person with on the spectrum to coming to a zoo or an aquarium or another living institution, or is it maybe
a living institution?
Yeah.
Yes. We refer to ourselves as a living institution.
Right. Versus
dead.
Yeah. Hang out. I think the living institution has many advantages. I think it's dynamic, and I think on a visual level, it's very exciting and can start a conversation about so many different things.
But also noisy, busy and noisy.
Outdoors.
I mean, kids can stim out or whatever.
Seals are flapping, and Luke is
attract
flapping. I mean, he's got a kindred spirit. He loves it. It's not unusual.
One thing that might be hard to make a distinction is what can we touch in a living institution, what can we not touch in a living institution? What's okay to interact with, what's not. That might be something to really try to make more clear, signage or something for parents.
We
I mean,
do.
we have that already, yeah.
I mean, it's because, sometimes the things that people want to touch are not what we can have them touch. Doesn't matter if they're on the autism spectrum or not.
Exactly.
It's, those you don't touch these you do. So, we have, for example, Prospect Park Zoo, the barn area where that's what you do there. You can pet the animals or not pet the animals, whatever you feed them. And the ones that are a little nippy don't get to visit the public too close. So, our horse. But we make it very clear.
And it's obvious. It's like we're not in an exhibit where these animals here you can't touch and these animals here. It's like this area, everything can be touched. This area,
although
you can't, because that's an easy distinction to make. But if it varies like animal by animal.
You've got me thinking. Because with the turkey and the geese, which they're probably harder to touch, but if you stuck your finger through a fence, they nip. They're not going to cause any damage. But we do have a little signs: don't feed the geese, just because they peck. But maybe we should think about that. But everything else is, if you can pet them.
Subtle differences
I'd like to see
are difficult.
sensory.
Yes,
If
it's
the child can detouch the stingray
and that's I've actually seen the programs at the aquarium that are adapted where it's a touch program, so the space that you're in, everything that's brought to the table can be handled. So clarity is helpful, and then if it's a space that's more sort of open to the public, maybe opening an hour earlier or an hour later for families who have kids on the autism spectrum.
I have a question for Elaine and for everybody, but I'm thinking about your comment earlier when you said when you looked through the listings and timeout kids, there were very few things that you felt were appropriate for you and your son. So I'm curious, what is it you look for in those listings? Is it as simple as this is an inclusive program, or are you using your whole sophisticated filter of everything that you know about your son and looking at every possibility and thinking, yes, or no, maybe?
I'm knowing my child and I'm thinking it's just inappropriate. It'd be too loud, it'd be too noisy, these kids would be running all over the place. There'd be no sense of safety for him.
Okay.
And I wrote to the editor, I said, hey, I'm Big Apple Oranges, let me write a column for you all about what is available. Many times I wrote to her, she doesn't write, she doesn't call,
But would like a keyword like disability friendly or something, or autism friendly help you, or if they're looking for specifics on what?
Or is it that because of the particular situation for your child that you're not really even looking for inclusive programs? It's a more sophisticated filter.
The Brooklyn Children's Museum is not necessarily a specific program. We go from room to room, and it's a place where at this point, we've gone so often, he's just safe and comfortable. He knows where to go and what he likes.
Okay.
So it's about, visiting several times, but yes, what I do when I teach at spas and resorts across the country, I go through their spa menu and I list which trimester, because I'm a prenatal massage specialist, it's appropriate. I would like to see somebody categorize that this is appropriate for the autistic spectrum child. Higher functioning, or kids with no language can enjoy this, to just say this, all children welcome, all children of all abilities welcome.
Well, it's interesting. I think we probably all have different experiences of language too. I think it's actually a very complicated question because I can only speak for myself, in our program, well, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. The documentary that was made about the Miracle Project is called Autism Musical. We say our program is for children of all abilities. Who do you think comes to our program? Mostly children with autism. Now, recently, I've made a huge effort to say we're for children of all abilities, and we're actually getting a lot of different disabilities in the room, and I relish in it, because to me, I try to create a no barrier kind of environment in terms of what we classify ourselves as. But that's a choice, but I think it's a complicated question in terms of how do you target your audience.
I'm gonna maybe even like a step further. So if you had some kind of independent, third party organization, I would say this is an event, this is a facility that we believe. That's what you're thinking, right? So this is something that Big Apple Oranges approves as being special needs friendly, or this is something that we're friends and enemies. but something where we're on a lot of these panels together, so we know. But something like that, right? So that this independent organization that's reputable, that's very sensitive and very knowledgeable of the needs of special needs of children, says that this is something that is suitable for all abilities, right? So instead of yourself labeling, it's being labeled by a third party. That would probably give you some credibility.
Also, you can do the color coding.
That's a great point. Yeah.
You know,
Third party.
Like color code, like little dots. So red means all children of all abilities are welcome. Orange means, not for kids with sensory issues. You know, and you just go to the rainbow or something. So each of these dots represents to the parent. You've got a code, you've got a key explaining what those dots represent.
But it was consistent among all of
Right.
us.
Yes. There'd have to be a background.
And
There'd have
not
to be
just ours too, like all.
An international kind of color code, a rainbow.
As part of our grant, we're going into our last year, and we do want to put together a public fair about programs all over the city at cultural institutions that have been adapted for people on the autism spectrum of all ages. So I'm going to make sure to get that information to you, because if you'd like to participate, we'd love to have you.
Can I get two specific points before you have things that I promised people I would say? Yes. So two things, right? One thing to come before lines and HOV lanes, like entering the facility. What I've heard from parents too, it's not just entrance lines that are a problem. There's also lines that, like cafes and food service. There's also lines to the bathroom, right? So don't think about waiting as just being to get into the facility. Think about all the different points within the facility where you might have to wait. And if you're going to address waiting, try to address waiting throughout. And then another one, a parent that wrote me a very, very specific, very detailed email, and he said that when his child was younger, they had an individual membership to wildlife conservation, and that individual membership allowed for two parents and any special needs children. So the special needs children were automatically included in the individual membership, and they had that for years. And even as the child got older, in his late teens and 20s, they would bring him to different facilities because he was able to go under their current membership. And then somehow that changed, and they tried to bring him, and they weren't allowed to anymore. And that was a big barrier that came up for him. So and that does kind of speak to the idea of within the adult community and people that are funded through Medicaid, that money is tight. It is difficult to plan for a residential group home facility to take their guys on an outing to one of these institutions, because it's very costly. And so if you have some kind of discount program or some kind of fee waiver program that's available to people, or if you build it into your memberships for families that special needs children can be included, those are some great ways to just ease the financial burden that sometimes is associated with the Miracle Project.
Yeah, family pricing, I think it's great.
Well, Medicaid is cutting back on everything.
And it's something, because we are in Crown Heights and we do have a huge low-income population. How do these people access programming for special needs children when they don't have the money for special camps and special programs and special?
Free, just make it free.
I mean, a lot of these programs are funded, right? So like City Access serves this a lower income population and offers opportunities to get out into the city to cultural institutions. So that's where a partnership with a service provider makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so you just need to do research about who those service providers are. Like HASC is another one if you're reaching out to in the Jewish community, adults with developmental disabilities. They go out to cultural institutions all over the city. So, but that is one thing that the adults on the panel in January talked about, was the fact that because of economic barriers and the financial constraints, they end up going to programs like First Saturdays, or they go on the days when it's free, but that's like the day that's really not conducive.
Right.
It's great. So I think we're going to have to end here, but I want to thank you all so much for giving your time and also helping to let us listen. Right? And I'm sure there will be email lists and actually most of us in this room are super easy to get to, I think. So you have some questions.
Thank you. It's been enormously informative and inspiring. And thank you so much for taking your precious time to meet with us. We have our next meeting on May 31st. And Hillary, do we have a location?
Yes, the Public Library, BPL.
Great.
Central Branch.
I encourage you to process this, what we've heard today, within your individual institutions, or maybe get together. But when we meet on the 31st, we'll be reflecting on what we heard today and generating ideas for potential collaborative programs that will go into our pool of ideas.
Thank you. I just want to thank Colin, of course, our videographer, and Andrea from Little Zelda, which is a locally owned business on Franklin. Thank you all for coming. If the panelists could just came back in a minute, we have a little special thank you for you guys.
Oh,
Thank you.
That was great.
Wow, great job, Monica.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.